Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA Reddit stories. In this Ripestories video, imagine inheriting a piece of paradise that has been in your family for generations only to have a rich developer try to steal it and build a golf course. They got so desperate that they threatened to destroy the only bridge connecting me to the outside world, so I told them to go ahead and do it. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the malicious compliance video. And the first one is titled r/malicious compliance in the US government. So to add some important backstory here, in the USA, government jobs are under the civil service system. This is supposed to ensure that government jobs are given out based on what you know and not who you know. For example, to get a job as an entry-level accountant, one would need to meet the minimum qualification of a Bachelor of Science in Accounting. Periodically, a test would be given for that position. The people who score highest on the test are first in line for jobs. This uses the so-called rule of three. So the job is supposed to go to one of the three highest scoring candidates who agree to accept the job if offered. Promotion examinations are held the same way. Needless to say though, managers and politicians hate this. There was a group of employees at my state agency who took every promotion exam we were qualified for and generally got top scores on all of them. We all had excellent work records and even awards for productivity, innovation, and going the extra mile. None of us had any black marks in our personal files other than maybe a counseling memo. That is basically a slap on the wrist less than a formal write-up. Boss told employee not to do X ever again. However, we had problems like use of offensive language. We said inappropriate things like, "Why are we doing this way? This is awkward and inefficient. We can streamline this process." Well, let me tell you, bosses don't like this kind of language. We also brought apparently offensive materials into the workplace. Stuff like, "Look at this. It says right here in Chapter X, Section Y of Z state law that we are doing this wrong." Bosses don't like this either. So now we have a group of highly qualified, motivated employees sitting on top of the promotion lists. The people the bosses wanted to promote were lower on the lists. But if three of us applied, were interviewed and said yes, then the job legally had to be given to one of us. We also got to know each other because the lists were available to employees. We started with calling each other, "Did you apply for X promotion?" And we sort of became a support group. We had even meet for lunch or drinks after work sometimes and called ourselves the Unpromotables. Then we realized something. Why are we only applying for jobs that we want? This is where the malicious compliance of the story comes in. The bunch of us started applying for every promotion we were on the list for. No matter how bad the job, how mean the boss, how toxic the office, no matter what the duties, we just all applied. And when asked if we would accept the job if offered, of course, we all said yes. Well, we heard through the grapevine that this was driving management just insane. Their teachers, pets and brown nosers wanted promotions, but we were blocking them. Whenever management tried something shady, they quickly found out that all of us knew our rights under state civil service law backwards and forwards. It was honestly both funny and frustrating to see management leave a position unfilled rather than give it to any of us. This was also not popular with the employees in those offices, who now had to pick up the slack from the vacant position, which was above their pay grade, as well as their own, with no increase in pay. Well, I was actually offered a promotion once and the hiring manager had started onboarding me, but the big boss over both offices shot it down because they did not want to lose me from my old position. That boss blocked my promotions for over a decade. Sorry, this does not have a happy ending. That was still the status quo when I took early retirement, the second I turned 55. I was planning on working longer, but 30+ years of a steady diet of toxic crap was drastically affecting my physical and mental health. And yeah guys, if you've ever worked at a toxic workplace and want to share your story, please feel free to do so in the comments. And while you're at it, I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, if you enjoy the malicious compliance stories. The next one is titled, "I let the HOA destroy my bridge and they were unaware it belongs to the government." And by the way, let me know where you are watching from today. So this whole thing happened a while back in the Philippines. A bit of background first, my family has owned a piece of land for generations. We are talking land that has been in the family since before even my grandparents were born. It sits across a river from the main road, and the only paved way to get to it is over an old concrete bridge. This bridge is ancient, like my dad remembers it being old when he was a kid.
It was put in by the national government as part of a public works project decades ago, back when the area was nothing but rice fields and a few scattered farms. Most people in the area did not even know it existed because there was nothing on our side of the river except our property and a few stretches of forest. Our place is a modest house with a big garden, some fruit trees, a small fish pond my dad dug himself, and a chicken coop that my wife absolutely loves. We grow some of our own food as well. We've got dogs, and yeah, it is quiet, it is peaceful, and it is ours. We pay our property taxes, we mind our own business, and we bother nobody. Now, here's where the trouble really starts. A few years ago, a big developer bought up almost all the land on the highway side of the river, hundreds of hectares of farmland and empty fields, scooped up at what I'm sure were below market prices because the original owners were mostly old farmers who did not know any better. The developer carved the whole thing into one of those gated luxury subdivisions, and they were also planning to add a golf course in a later phase. The subdivision was huge and it almost completely surrounded the highway side of the river. The bridge connecting our land to the highway happened to land geographically right at the edge of where the new gated community ended. So if you wanted to drive into our place, you would come off the highway, drive along a public road that ran past the entrance of the subdivision, and then turn onto the bridge. The HOA did not like that, not one bit, let me tell you. It started small actually. The HOA president, a woman I will call Mrs. Beltran, not her real name but close enough for the story, began sending us friendly little letters asking if we would be interested in selling our land to the development, aka selling your soul to the devil. The price they offered was just an insult. I'm not exaggerating here, it was maybe a fifth of what the land was worth, and our land had sentimental value too that no amount of money was gonna replace. My grandfather is buried on that property, my dad is buried on that property, and there's a tree that my wife and I planted on the day we got married. You don't just sell that, so we politely declined, and then the letters got less polite. The next round of letters suggested that since our property shared a boundary with the subdivision, it didn't, the river was the boundary, we should consider joining the HOA. They claimed our presence was negatively affecting property values because our humble home, with its visible chicken coop and fruit trees, was apparently an eyesore to their potential buyers. They then told us if we joined, we would have to pay monthly dues, follow their architectural guidelines, and basically stop being us. We declined again. And by the way, guys, is OP crazy or something? I mean, what the HOA is offering here is really enticing. Pay useless monthly dues, follow stupid architectural guidelines, and stop being an individual. That sounds amazing in my book. Anyway, more firmly this time, my wife wrote a very polite letter explaining that our land has never been part of any subdivision and was registered in our family's name long before their development even existed, and we had no obligation or interest in joining their organization. Well, unfortunately, that is when the real harassment began. It started with a security guard from the subdivision flagging down my truck one morning when I was heading out to buy some supplies. He told me I needed to register my vehicle with the HOA if I was gonna keep using their road. I told him the road was a public road, which it was, and that my truck did not need to be registered with anybody but the government. He got huffy and said he would have to report me. I told him to report whoever he wanted, and I drove off. And then it was the trash. Someone basically started dumping construction debris near our gate, old bricks, broken concrete, drywall scraps. I never caught them in the act, but it was always neat little piles dumped at night, and it was always on our side of the bridge. We would clean it up, and a few days later, more would appear. Then someone shot one of our dogs with a pellet gun, did not kill her, thank God, but she limped for weeks and I had to take her to the vet to get the pellet removed. That one really set me off. My wife cried, I cried, honestly. I made a police report, but there was no way to prove who actually did it. And then came the official-looking documents. We started getting these formal-looking notices with the subdivision's logo at the top claiming we were in violation of various community standards, things like unapproved exterior color, non-compliant fencing, and my personal favorite, unauthorized livestock. We had like 6 chickens, 6 plus the dogs. It was ridiculous, so I ignored them. They had no authority over us, none. The notices kept coming though every week, sometimes twice a week. Each one threatened fines that we, of course, never paid because, again, they had absolutely zero legal authority over our land. My wife was getting stressed out too though. She would see the envelopes in our mailbox and her shoulders would tense up. I just started throwing them in a box without even opening them. By the way, guys, I forgot to say my apologies if I still sound a little bit sick. It seems like this cold is taking a bit longer. Anyway, I figured one day I might need them as evidence of harassment, but I was not gonna let them ruin my breakfast every morning. I tried to talk to a lawyer about it. He looked over the situation, told me they had no case, and said unless they did something concrete, we could not really sue them for sending us some paper. He said to document everything, save every notice and just wait. These types, he said, always escalate. Just give them rope. And he was right. The escalation came in the form of a meeting. The HOA invited us, in writing, to a discussion at their clubhouse to resolve our boundary issues. My wife thought that we shouldn't go. I thought we should, just to see what kind of nonsense they were gonna pull. Mrs. Beltran was waiting in a conference room with 2 other board members, a man and a woman whose names I don't remember. What they wanted, it turned out, was the bridge. She gave me a stack of papers. It was a legal demand drafted by their lawyer claiming that the bridge constituted a so-called unauthorized structure connecting to private subdivision infrastructure. According to the document, the road on the highway side, the road that the bridge connected to, was actually the property of the HOA because they had built improvements on it, aka paving, drainage and lighting. They claimed that since our bridge terminated on their property, the bridge itself was therefore using their property without permission. Their solution? We had 2 options. Option number 1, pay HOA dues going forward, sign an agreement to abide by their rules, and they would grant us an easement to keep using the bridge. Option number 2, they would be forced to demolish the bridge to secure their perimeter. I almost laughed at that. I asked her very calmly if she had researched the bridge at all. If she knew when it was built, who built it, she waved her hand though and said her lawyers had reviewed everything and they were fully within their rights. She also said something about how they had concerns about security because anyone could just drive over the bridge into the area near their development, as if our family was not there generations before any of them. I sat for a moment and then I had this idea. This beautiful, horrible idea. And by the way, guys, if you would be in OP's situation here, what would you have done? Would you have had a beautiful, horrible idea as well? Let me know in the comments. OP's idea is absolutely insane. So I asked her to clarify on the record what would happen if I didn't pay the dues, and she said very clearly that they would proceed with removing the structure to protect the integrity of the community. I asked her again, "You're saying you intend to demolish the bridge if I don't comply?" And she nodded, "That's correct." I told her I would think about it. I then drove home with my hands shaking. I was not scared, I was excited, I was furious in a way that felt almost calm. You know that feeling? Like everything goes still and you just see clearly. When I got home, I sat my wife down and explained what they wanted. She got really quiet. Then she asked the question I knew she was gonna ask. What about the bridge? How would we get out? Here's the thing about our property that nobody outside the family really knew. Our land is big, it backs up against a section of forest, and on the far end of that forest there's an old dirt road. It's not paved, it's barely even a road. It's more like a path that the local farmers used a long time ago to get to a small town in the next municipality. It is overgrown, it is bumpy, and during the rainy season, parts of it turn into mud. But it works, and we've used it ourselves a few times. When the bridge had repairs going on, it adds about 20 minutes to the drive to anywhere we would want to go, but it exists. We were not gonna be trapped here. I told my wife my plan, she thought I was crazy, then she thought about it for a while. And finally she said, "Do it. Burn them." So here is what I did. I sat down and wrote a reply to the HOA. I kept it short. I want to share roughly what I said because I'm proud of it. I wrote that I'd reviewed their demand and that I would not be joining the HOA, paying their dues or signing any of their agreements. However, I wrote that if they genuinely believed the bridge was a security threat to their community and an unauthorized structure on their property, then I would not stand in the way of them addressing what they perceived as a problem on their own land. I wrote very specifically that I would not interfere with their decision to remove the bridge if that was the action they chose to take, and I made sure to phrase it as their decision on their property for their reasons. I complied with their demands to the letter. I sent it certified mail, I kept a copy, and I also emailed them the same letter because I wanted multiple paper trails for this. Now you might be reading this and thinking, why didn't you just tell them the bridge belonged to the government? I had spent months watching this woman and her board treat my family like we were some kind of stain on their precious development. They had threatened us, harassed us, hurt my dog, dumped trash on my land, and tried to legally bully us off property that had been in our family for generations. I wanted them to really feel it. I wanted them to hit a wall so hard that they would never recover. So I let them have their rope. About 2 weeks after I sent the letter, my wife and I were having coffee on the porch when we heard heavy machinery. We both looked at each other. We knew. We just knew. I grabbed my phone and started walking towards the bridge. My wife came with me and so did our nephew, who was visiting at the time. He's the one who actually filmed most of what happened next, because my hands were shaking too much to keep the camera steady. When we got to the bridge, there was already a crew there, 2 excavators, a backhoe, a dump truck, and a small crowd of guys in hard hats. There was also a black SUV parked off to the side, and standing next to it with her arms crossed and looking like she was watching a coronation was Mrs. Beltran herself. She had brought her 2 board members, and she had brought what looked like her lawyer. She had even brought a photographer. I'm not joking here, she had a photographer. She wanted pictures of this. I walked up to her holding up my phone, which was recording, and asked her on camera to confirm that this demolition was being carried out at her discretion, direction, and on her authority. She looked me right in the face and said, "Yes, as we informed you, we are removing the unauthorized structure from our property. You were given the option to comply with our community standards, and you refused. This is the consequence." I asked her if she was absolutely sure, and I made it sound concerned. I think I even asked twice. I said something like, "You're certain you want to proceed? This is a major action." She got annoyed and said, "Just step back and let us work." So I stepped back, and my nephew kept filming. My wife held my hand so tight I think she left fingernail marks. The demolition crew started in. They didn't even do it carefully. They just brought the excavators in and started smashing the bridge from the middle outward. Concrete chunks, some of them the size of cars, started falling into the river below. The river is fairly deep at that point and the current is pretty strong. The water around the bridge turned brown almost immediately as sediment kicked up. Big sections of rebar from inside the concrete were sticking up out of the water like bones. The crew worked for a long time. And by the end of it, the river was filled with chunks of concrete, twisted rebar, and what was probably some leaked diesel from the equipment. Mrs. Beltran was beaming the entire time. She was acting like she was at a parade or something. Right before they finished, she walked over to me and said with this big smug smile, "I hope you have made some arrangements." Then she got into her SUV and left. I watched her drive away, and then I went back to the house, sat down at my kitchen table with my wife, and we ate dinner. She made adobo, which is my favorite. We didn't talk much. We were both kind of in shock about what happened, even though I'd been planning this. There's something different about watching it actually happen. So then I made phone calls. I called the regional office of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I called the Department of Public Works, and I called a friend who works at the local government office. I called my lawyer as well. I even called a journalist I'd met once at a community event who covered local issues. I sent emails, I sent the video, I sent the photos, I sent copies of every harassment letter the HOA had ever sent me. I even sent a copy of their demand letter. I sent a copy of my response in which I'd been very careful to phrase everything as their decision and their action. I went to bed that night thinking maybe I would get a response in a week or 2, maybe a month. Government agencies in our country are not exactly known for moving fast. I was very wrong about that though. Apparently, dropping tons of concrete and steel into a flowing river is what they call a big deal. Who knew, right? Well, sometime after reporting all this, I saw 3 vehicles parked outside our gate. One was from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, one was from the Department of Public Works, one was a marked police vehicle, and I let them in. I walked them down to where the bridge used to be. I showed them the pile of debris in the river. I showed them the giant chunks of concrete still visible above the waterline. I showed them the photos and documents, and I gave them the timeline. I told them everything. The DNR guy actually said out loud, "Oh, this is bad. This is really bad." He took out a measuring device and started taking water samples, and he photographed everything. The DPWH guy spent a long time staring at the broken pieces of bridge, and at one point I heard him say something to his colleague about how this was a national infrastructure project that was not even theirs to touch, and he sounded genuinely angry. Within a couple of days, the government issued a formal stop work order on the entire subdivision. All construction, including the proposed golf course, was halted. The HOA's lawyers tried to fight it, but they did not have a leg to stand on. Or a bridge, I guess. The bridge was, in fact, a registered piece of national infrastructure, and there was no record anywhere of the HOA owning it, the road it connected to, or having any authority to demolish anything. It got worse for them, though. The investigation revealed that the HOA had been doing all kinds of things they should not have been doing. They had been treating public roads near their development as private property, blocking off access points, charging fees for entry, and harassing non-residents who tried to use those roads. They had been dumping construction runoff into a different part of the same river system without any permits, and they had been operating their man-made lake without proper environmental clearance. The bridge thing was just the loudest crime here, but once investigators started digging, they found a whole list of others. The fines were enormous. I won't pretend I know the exact amount because I never saw the official paperwork, but I know it was in the tens of millions of pesos range, and I know it was way more than the HOA had in its reserves. They apparently tried to assess emergency dues from their members to cover it, and the members revolted. A lot of them had bought into the subdivision because of the promised golf course and amenities, and now those were all on hold or cancelled. Property values in the subdivision tanked, some of the residents started selling. Mrs. Beltran was of course the face of the whole disaster. She was personally named in the demolition order, and there was video of her personally directing the destruction of a piece of national infrastructure. There were criminal complaints filed against her, and although I will spare you the legal play-by-play because frankly I don't want to relive every meeting my lawyer dragged me to, the long and short of it is that she took the fall for most of it. She was removed as HOA president and ended up behind bars later. However, she tried to sue me at one point for deceiving her about the nature of the bridge, which is one of the most absurd legal claims I've ever heard, and that case got tossed almost immediately because I'd been very careful to never lie. I had simply not corrected her assumptions. There's a difference, and apparently the courts agreed. My letter, the one where I gave her permission to demolish the structure connecting to your land, was used in evidence against her. Her own lawyers had reviewed it and somehow missed that I had specifically framed the bridge as being on her property, which it actually wasn't, and that I had made her decision-making process her own. They tried to spin it as me lying, but the judge was not impressed. The HOA itself didn't survive either. Between the fines, the lawsuits from their own members, the cancelled construction, and the absolute PR catastrophe, they could not keep operating. The HOA was formally dissolved. Oh, and by the way, the bridge? It got rebuilt. They prioritized it because, as they pointed out, it was a piece of national infrastructure that had been illegally destroyed and needed to be replaced. The funding for the rebuild came partly from the fines collected from the HOA, so in a very real sense, they paid to rebuild the very bridge they paid to destroy. And the next one is a brand new malicious compliance story, which is titled, "Manager said to follow the checklist exactly, so I did every single line." So I used to work in a small warehouse where we had a daily closing checklist that honestly no one took so seriously. It was one of those things that had clearly been written years ago and never updated, so most of us just did the important parts and then went home. Well, recently, we got a new manager who was very big on accountability and kept saying that we needed to follow procedures exactly as written, no shortcuts. He called me out in front of everyone one day for skipping a few steps that didn't really apply anymore, which was kind of embarrassing, not gonna lie. So then, the next shift I decided, alright, I will follow it exactly. The checklist had things like, inspect all emergency exits, which meant I had to walk across the entire building and check doors that are basically never used. And there was also a step about testing backup lighting, which involved turning off the main lights in sections and waiting to see if the backups then kicked in. This whole process took way longer than usual, and since I was doing it properly, I could not help the rest of the team finish up faster like I normally would. People were stuck waiting around because certain tasks depend on others being done first. So by the time I finished everything, we were almost an hour past closing time. The manager was still there and asked why it took so long, so I showed him the checklist and pointed out that I followed every single step exactly like he told us to. He looked pretty annoyed but didn't really have anything to say without contradicting himself. After that, the checklist mysteriously got updated the next week, and suddenly we were now allowed to skip half those steps again. Some coworkers said I was being petty, but I just did what I was told, right? And yeah guys, what can I say? OP did exactly what he was told to do. Nothing more, nothing less, I guess. Thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.